Hello everyone, back to today's second video. So we're doing 5-day forecast. You can find the videos out here on my homepage. Just scroll down the page a little bit and it's parabolic out. There's also a written version, get out from buttons at the top of the page. And it's going to be a very interesting 5 days coming up, especially from the weekend and into the start of next week. We're going to get some unusually warm weather, but potentially by Monday also turning quite wet and windy in the northwest. So I'll let you have a look at that and see what you think to that one. This will be extending out beyond the 5-day forecast period, so we go to the week to 10-day time frame with this update. Takes us to around the 21st of October, so well into the second half of the month. I'll also have a look at the Bayesian Climate Centre for the next 40 days as well. But we'll start off looking at the Arctic and North Atlantic oscillations. So this chart is the Arctic oscillation observed and forecast chart from CPC, NCP and NOAA. We can go right way back to the summer with this chart. So the black line here tells us where we've been with the Arctic oscillation. The red lines at the end where the GFS ensembles are forecasting the Arctic oscillation to go. Remember, this is just an index that's reflecting the state of the atmosphere in the North Pole. It's not driving anything, just tells you what the atmosphere is doing. When the Arctic oscillation is positive, essentially you've got low pressure over the pole and you're strengthening, usually high pressure through the mid-latitudes. And then when the Arctic oscillation goes negative, you've normally got high pressure up over the pole, so you've got blocking over the pole. And you tend to have low pressure then through the mid-latitudes. In winter, a negative Arctic oscillation is one of the things that can go with increased risk of colder weather, because the blocking high pressure forces the cold air out of the pole down into mid-latitudes, courtesy of the trough. So you can see, going back to summer, generally the Arctic oscillation has been quite positive. So back into June through July and into August, we have a positive Arctic oscillation. Continues into September as well. And in the second half of September, we went quite negative, just briefly, for a couple of weeks through the second half of September with the Arctic oscillation. Then we went positive into the start of October. We're currently still very positive with the AO, the Arctic oscillation. But the GFS ensembles, you'll notice they're dipping down here in the second half of the month. So we are forecasting the Arctic oscillation to go negative into the second half of October. And that could be associated with an increased chance of high pressure up over the pole. And if we do get some high pressure over the pole, then we might turn things significantly cooler compared to what we've had through the first half of October. We might turn things significantly more unsettled as well. In October, a negative AO tends to be a cool and unsettled signal. This is the North Atlantic oscillation. It's the same idea, observed and forecast. And again, it's the same idea that this isn't driving anything, it just tells you what the atmosphere is doing. This time, instead of in the Arctic, we're looking at the North Atlantic. So when the North Atlantic oscillation is positive, you've got high pressure strengthened through the Azores, and you've got low pressure strengthened around Iceland. It's the default setup, really, especially in winter for the UK and Europe, with stronger westerly flow and zonal winds. When the North Atlantic oscillation goes negative, however, it's a reverse. So you'll tend to get high pressure setting up around Iceland and low pressure down through the Azores. If you get these two indexes in sync with one another, the NAO and the AO, they both go negative in winter, then it can tend to be quite a cold signal. But if they're both positive in winter, it tends to be quite a mild signal. So it's one of the things we look at quite a lot through the winter months, less so at other times of the year. Now, the black line tells us where we've been with the NAO. Again, we go back into the summer with this. Red lines at the end where the GFS ensemble is forecasting the NAO to go. We did go out of sync a little bit with the two indexes through the latter part of the summer and into the autumn. You'll notice through June and into July, we was positive with the NAO then, as we was with the AO. But in the second half of July, we find the NAO going negative, and it stays negative through most of August and into September as well, at odds with what happened in the Arctic, because we know in the Arctic, the Arctic oscillation was generally in a positive state. So it is quite unusual to get the two indexes going out of sync with one another over such a long time. They can do so over a few days, a couple of weeks of course, but that's quite a protracted period where the two indexes were out of sync, which as I say is quite unusual. The latest though, we get to October and the NAO goes positive, so now we have got the two indexes in sync with one another. Both the AO and the NAO are positive, which tells us that the westerlies are strong, but not necessarily all that wet. What's actually happened is that the Azores High has strengthened, so we're having quite a mild first half to October, but with a zonal flow. Now, the ensembles, the GFS ensembles, are forecasting the NAO to start to go negative into the second half of October as well. So we've got indications here that both the Arctic Oscillation and the North Atlantic Oscillation might be trending negative as we go through into the second half of October. And this, if we do get the two indexes going negative, this could well be an indication that we're going to get something significantly more unsettled coming along through the second half of October. Might turn significantly cooler as well before this month is out. As ever, with all ensemble data and model data, it is unreliable, and the further out you go, the more unreliable it gets. So it's not to be relied upon, but there's a clear signal there, I think, that for the second half of October, the two indexes are going quite negative, potentially leading to something cooler and more unsettled as we run into the final week to 10 days or so of the month. Right, we'll look at the GFS ensembles next, and we're looking at Birmingham today. So red line here is the upper air temperature average, and well, you can see what's going to happen over the next few days. It's going to go very significantly warmer than average. This is all covered in the 5-day forecast time frame, but by the time we get through to the start of next week, we are very close in Birmingham to 15 Celsius and 850 HPA. That's very warm. If you get that in July, rather than October, you'll be talking about temperatures potentially getting to around 30 degrees. Of course, it's October, so not going to get that hot, but even so, we could well be looking at temperatures into the mid-20s Celsius by the time we get through to Monday. But then quite a drop in the temperature coming along through the rest of next week. So in fact, by the time you get through to the end of next week, we are pretty much back to the 30-year temperature average, maybe even going ever so slightly below. And in terms of precipitation, so lots of dry weather coming up over the next few days in Birmingham. It's very wet in the northwest of the country today, but down through the Midlands into southern and southeast England, it's pretty dry. Will be a little patchy rain tonight, but not mounted to too much. And after that, essentially it's dry through the rest of the week and the weekend. But next week, the rainfall spikes are coming back, so turning cooler and turning more unsettled as we run into the second half of October is the clear signal from the GFS ensemble data today. Have a look at surface temperature and air pressure next. Again, this is for Birmingham, so we're starting off today around 15 degrees Celsius. We'll have a cooler night coming up tonight. Then the temperatures are lifting up through the rest of the week into the weekend, peaking around there on Monday, 16th of October, above 20 degrees Celsius in Birmingham, so probably peaking at around 21 or 22. Down in the southeast, somewhere like central London, might peak at around 25 on Monday afternoon. But after that, the temperatures are cooling back down again, going under 20 degrees by Tuesday, and then a gradual cooling trend taking place there as we go through into the second half of the month. So actually, by the time you get through to sort of the last week of October, we're struggling to get above 10 degrees Celsius by that point, significantly more unsettled and significantly cooler as well, and some cooler nights coming up as well. So you notice minimum temperatures over the next few nights are going to be above 10 degrees Celsius generally, but into the second half of next week, those temperatures are cooling down, and by the time you get through to the final days or final week of October, we might even be going close to 0 degrees Celsius, might get down to frost levels. Signs of autumn definitely setting in there for the second half of October. In terms of air pressure, so quite low for pressure today, but it'll be rising up to around 1,000 20 millibars through the second half of this week. Then as drop in pressure taking place through into next week, going down close to 1,000 millibars then. Maybe hints of a little bit of a recovery for the final week of October. That's a very long way off. There's a huge amount of scatter in there. The general idea is that it's turning more unsettled and cooler next week. Temperature anomalies though for the next week are coming out very warm. This is from the 11th to the 19th of October. And you see, we're not alone. Virtually the whole of Europe, really, from Ireland and Portugal out west over to Russia in the east and all places in between, are coming out with temperature anomalies somewhere between around 2 and 8 degrees above average. So a very warm week coming up through many parts of Europe. British Isles is included. Precipitation anomalies are looking like this from the 11th to 19th of October. Most parts of Europe are coming out significantly drier than average. Notice the north of the UK is turning a bit wetter than average. Expect these to trend wetter in the coming days. Over in America, most parts of America are coming out with above average temperature anomalies. It's cold and average in the Pacific Northwest. Elsewhere, those temperature anomalies are above average. So both sides of the Atlantic, interestingly, are quite substantially warmer than average at the moment. Precipitation anomalies for America, many parts of the states are coming out quite dry from the 11th to the 19th of October. Let's have a look at the GFS for Sunday then. This is all dealt with the 5-day forecast, which we released earlier on today. But Sunday, you've got high pressure, big ridge there across central parts of Europe. We're on the western side of that ridge of high pressure, pulling up these very warm southerly winds. That continues into Monday. On Monday, we also add into the mix this very deep area of low pressure to the west of Ireland. That's the remains of Hurricane Ophelia. Got to watch out got to watch out for what that's going to do. It might give a spell of very wet and stormy weather to parts of Ireland and western Scotland, but its exact track really open to a lot of doubt at the moment. So we've got that storm system to west of Ireland. The bulk of the UK, we're just pulling up this very warm southerly wind again. There's the upper air temperatures for Monday. These are unusually warm upper air temperatures. So we've got the plus 10 Celsius isotherm there heading into the north of Scotland, and the 15 Celsius isotherm appears to be pushing across much of England and Wales. I say that's very unusually warm air for the middle part of October. If that was in summer, you'd be expecting temperatures at or above 30 degrees Celsius. As it's mid-autumn, it's not going to be that warm, but I would be surprised to see temperatures getting into the mid-20s Celsius there, depending, of course, on what happens with Ophelia. If Ophelia, or the remains of Ophelia, I should say, are pushed eastwards into the UK, then it's just going to be a thoroughly wet and windy, quite stormy day. But what the GFS is doing with this low pressure running it to the west of Ireland means that most of the UK has a reasonably brightish day, especially in the east, and that does allow probably the temperatures to get to around 25 degrees Celsius. By the end of Monday, that storm system is heading up towards the west of Scotland, probably pushing a cold front eastwards across the country. So temperatures significantly cooling down in the west by the end of Monday, and that cooler weather is heading in across the UK. By the time you get through to Tuesday, we'll all be in a much cooler and fresher air mass. Keep in mind, that's running into very warm and humid air, so there might be something a bit thundery happening on Monday afternoon and evening in the east. Then through the rest of next week, it's a case of watching this cooler air coming in from off the Atlantic, and it turns more unsettled as well. This is how things are looking by Wednesday next week, for example, where low pressure is firmly taking control of the weather pattern, and then it just turns really unsettled through the second half of next week. We're unleashing the Atlantic. The Atlantic strikes back, if you like, turning wet and windy across many parts of the country. Much cooler temperatures as well. The air that are coming from the tropical Atlantic is coming from the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean, so not only is it much wetter, it's also much cooler as well. And we get to day 10 looking like that, firmly trapped in an unsettled weather pattern. If we go out beyond day 10, we're it stays very unsettled, but notice we do start to see heights beginning to rise to our north. Pressure is starting to rise up around Greenland. That's probably associated with what we saw with the Arctic Oscillation, trending more negative there as we go into the latter stages of October. Then the ECWF looks like this. So there's that very warm southerly wind coming up across the country on Saturday. That's the remains of Hurricane Ophelia just there at midnight on Monday, pushing up those southerly winds ahead of it. There's the upper air temperatures looking very warm, particularly for England and Wales. That's a really unusual weather chart. That does look a little bit tropical, I have to say, with that low pressure just there. Of course, it's got tropical remains, but it does look rather tropical, that system down off the coast of the Bay of Biscay, and the very warm southerly winds that are being dragged up ahead of that storm system. By midnight on Tuesday, so the remains of Ophelia are out to the west of Ireland just there. So not producing too much in the way of damaging weather for the UK, but probably giving Ireland a bit of a battering. The main thing is that there's just a cold front moving across the country, probably taking some rain and introducing much cooler, fresher air. And then same idea of the ECWF as we saw with the GFS. For the rest of next week, we descend very rapidly and dramatically in some ways into really autumnal weather. So that's how things are looking on Thursday, a very unsettled looking weather pattern with low pressure dominating off the Atlantic and a lot cooler with the air as well. We finish up on day 10 looking like that. So low pressure's dominating there. It's wet, it's windy, and notice again there's definite signs of heights beginning to rise through the mid-Atlantic, possibly going up towards Greenland. If this low pressure just here, if this trough is forced eastwards, we might start to think about opening the door to some northerly winds through the final week of October. Very dramatic weather coming up next week from beginning to end. Finally, just have a look at the page flight centre for the next 40 days. So these are 500 millibar heights broken down to 10-day periods. First 10-day period taking us from the 11th to the 20th of October. Coming 10 days looks unsettled. Low pressure is dominating with the jet stream coming in like that. So essentially the message is make the most of any drier weather that we get at the weekend. That dry and warm weather, it's not going to last through next week. It turns autumnal. This is how things are looking in the next 10-day period, the 21st through to the 30th of October. Area of above average heights building through the mid-Atlantic. So we've got a mid-Atlantic ridge. We're doing something like that, the flowing with the jet stream. That could be quite cool there. Probably not all that unsettled, but I think that is turning a lot cooler, and I wouldn't rule out the chance of night frost coming along with that for the final week to 10 days of October. Then changes again through the first 10 days of November. This is the 31st of October to the 9th of November, with the above average heights now heading down towards Spain and the Bay of Biscay. So this is reverting back to just a typical westerly flow, probably quite mild, and for the south reasonably dry, more unsettled up to the north. And then we finish up on the final 10-day period, or at the final 10-day period, the 10th through to the 19th of November, has the ridge again pulling back into the mid-Atlantic. So this could again be starting to draw down some cooler air from the northwest or the north, with the jet stream and the flow going a little bit like that. So rather up and down with the temperatures over the next 40 days. That's all very speculative. Coming back to the next week to 10 days, so we've got this very warm weather coming up, particularly England and Wales, at the weekend and into the start of next week. Temperatures might peak at around 25 Celsius with this on Monday, depending on what happens with the remains of Hurricane Ophelia. And then from Tuesday onwards next week, we descend, if the models are right anyway, we descend very rapidly and quite dramatically into proper autumn conditions, turning cool, wet and windy through next week after those summer-like conditions to start. So it'll be a very interesting week next week with a lot of changes in the weather. Nearly 20 minutes of this video. There's a lot going on, so I hope you found it interesting and informative. Don't forget to check out 5 Day Forecast if you haven't yet done so. That's all for now, and thanks for watching.